And then the Army canceled the program after 3 years or multiple years and $3 billion of development investment, because what they were learning in Ukraine is these small autonomous drone swarms were taking down manned helicopters.
Yeah.
Like, we can't put any money into this.
It's the new age artillery, people. Like, if you haven't been paying attention to this is new age artillery. This is unlike any warfare we've even remotely ever had.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 Podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again. My name's Robert McFarland. Today's guest, Brad Plothow. He's the Chief Growth Officer for Intergalactic. He's much more than that. He's had a really great track record of success in other things that he's done. We get into that, a little bit of history, but we talk about transformation within the local community here in Southern Utah. What are some transformational forces going on, whether it's through housing, water, we talk about electricity, we talk about media. So I think there's a lot in this episode you can get some value from. Jazzy Jeff, the purveyor of hot dogs, is with us, that joins us in the conversation. We hope you enjoy this episode. And you can see I don't have a beard. It's Diabetes Awareness Month. If you know, my son has type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed when he was 4 years old. And so all month long, all of November, we're raising money for the Washington County Diabetic Youth Association. Go into the description, click on the link, give us $5, $1, $2. It sends kids with type 1 diabetes to a camp every year. It helps bring education to the community, to the parents, to the siblings of the families that have diabetes, because I know from my own perspective, it's a challenging thing to deal with it within a family, and the Diabetic Youth Association in Washington County does a great job. So hopefully you could donate to that. Other than that, enjoy the episode, guys. We'll see you out there.
The problem, but not a problem with, being in business for yourself or being an entrepreneur, is that
if you don't do anything, you won't do anything.
Well, or if you don't do anything, you won't get paid.
Yeah. So it's
for the most part,
Yeah. It's tough.
Like, even if you're talking cash flow, right? Like mailbox money, like if you didn't do anything to get to that point, then you wouldn't make any money.
Well, and then I think, Brad, I think you probably resonate with this, is that even though you're not necessarily an entrepreneur, you've kind of taken that route within all the organizations you've always gone to, right?
Intrapreneur?
Entrepreneur? Is that what we would call it?
That's a thing, right, Brad? Intrapreneur?
Yeah, it's funny. When Brian was talking to me about joining Intergalactic, I sent him a deck just kind of on my own volition of like, this is how I think, this is how I do things, just so we're aligned. And one of the slides was about startups within startups. If you're building a function inside of a startup, you're not taking on the same risk level. Although I think any startup has a certain amount of just inherent risk.
Yeah.
But I mean, you got to build it. You got to sort of be, the founder of that function.
That function. Yeah. Because as whatever your role is within whatever organization you're saying I'm signing up for, whether you're the creator of that organization or a participant in it, it's as long as everybody shows up to the best of their capability in that job, and they still believe in that job is worth showing up for every day. Like, that's how you get the best companies, right? But it's always tough, especially I guess for me, because I don't really have employees. It's all just partners. Yeah. It's just people like, if you want to be in partnership with us, great. If not, that's okay too. And we just kind of keep running forward. Mm-hmm. But once you start to scale, it gets really tough.
Yeah. The tension is always, how do you maintain like the grit, the entrepreneurial spirit, the tenacity that helps you get the leverage initially and then scale it. Cause it's just really easy for stuff to turn into, now we're turning cranks. And some of that's probably necessary. You got to build systems and things that can scale. And some of that is about systems and about people who understand how to, take the initial momentum and turn it into something more sustainable. But there's also, you got to have, there's an art to that too, because if you do that too early, you really kill the momentum that you build.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough to do. And as we think about tenacity, that made me think of the 5 working geniuses. Have you heard about that personality profile?
I've heard the concept. I haven't taken that test.
Yeah. So I took that test, and I was working with a team at Keller Williams when I was running the brokerage here locally. And I did it with my team, and tenacity is where I'm falling short on it. And I can see that reality in my life as it plays out. And it's interesting how when you can see where you're weak, like where your weakness is, there's like the strengths finders, and there's a lot of different tests that tell you different things about yourself. But how do you go apply that is really difficult to like actually like show up in your life that way. But when I did that 5 working geniuses test, and then I did it with the rest of my team, we could see did we have the right mix overlap of strengths and weaknesses? And that's like really critical at that early stage. But being tenacious is definitely not something that comes naturally to me, nor, yeah. I guess I'm frustrated by it, but are you pretty tenacious? You seem like you're pretty tenacious.
So I think there are some people who like encoded into their DNA is a certain amount of tenacity. And no matter if they were selling furniture or like building an AI startup, they're super tenacious people.
I can see it in kids. I can see it in kids. I can see it in kids, like early on, like young kids. You can see the ones that have like the natural born tenacity, probably by like 6. I bet you by 6 you could tell. Like these kids are the tenacious ones.
For sure. And I think, there's a certain like segment of people who are just that way. It's inborn. And like some of it can be very, very beneficial. It's really difficult, I think, though, to have some folks harness it the right way. It can become pretty antisocial. It can be, you can alienate a lot of people if you're too tenacious in ways that becomes, I think, difficult for you to manage human beings. But I think also, like, I don't know, for most of us, like mere mortals, I think some of it is about finding the right alignment of interests, and that unlocks the tenacity. Like when you have the right opportunity, a vision that is inspiring and motivating that you can remind people of with good communication, and then you have incentives aligned the right way, people understand, like you get to the mountaintop, everyone's going to benefit in concrete ways. I think a lot of times that's what's missing is like some element of that mix is gone. Either, we don't have like the right opportunity, or we don't have a clear vision of like what it's going to take to get there and belief in it, the ability to get there, or maybe incentives are not aligned very well. And I think there's like, it's an underrated exercise to go through that and say, let's examine those different parts of the equation. And if something's working, let's not fix that. But if something's broken, you can get to that if you just like sort of drill down. And then, most of us have like a pretty tenacious piece of us that's waiting to get unlocked, unless you just like fundamentally want to turn a crank at work all day. And I think, most people I've met who work in, fields where, you're trying to do something interesting or impactful don't have that mentality. They may not be like just all the time on go, tenacious, veins in their teeth all the time, but they do have the ability to go and get into that mode. So I don't know, it's a very elusive thing for sure.
Yeah, it is. You seem like you've done a good job at building teams, at least from the outside looking in. But I do want to, this is a perfect segue to the agile development. Have you ever heard of the term or like the business strategy of agile development, or in terms similar to that?
Like in the software world?
Software, yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I came out of the tech sector before getting into aerospace. So
that's right.
Very familiar with that whole concept.
So that was one thing Jeff and I wanted to just double click on and maybe like help us understand that. And then as real estate agents that want to serve the community, because it's so connected to the actual human, real estate is, because it's such a personal transaction. I'm going through this one deal right now, dude, that it's heartbreaking for me because it's going not at all the way we planned. You know what I mean? And sometimes we just can't navigate all of the boundaries to get there, but it's a very emotional thing. And so as a real estate agent that actually cares, I really do care about where somebody's headed, where they're going. I don't think there's a real estate agent out there that truly just doesn't care, but I want to build the foundation of my real estate business, not on how many we can sell, but how many can we do really good, right? Because you talked about in your presentation at Rise, like transactional and transformative type businesses, right? And so it's a tough balance when you're still in a transactional business like real estate. But I think for somebody listening in, applying agile development to other types of industries and other types of modes of work other than just software, I think be an interesting conversation to have. So maybe if somebody's listening and doesn't have any idea what agile development is, can you give us a summary?
Yeah, I can give like the kind of layman summary. So I'm not a program or a product manager in the tech sector. I was always on kind of the marketing and growth side. And so, there's certain limitations and also a certain level of depth there that I think is probably best reserved for like the tech sector. But the general idea, if you imagine that you're going to build a product, a technology product, a software product, and you say, we have a pretty good idea of what the customer wants, and we're going to break that down into a whole bunch of requirements. And then we're going to execute against all those requirements on a schedule. And then we're going to launch that. There's lots of different ways you can do that. And one of the ways that you can do that is to understand and recognize that there's a certain amount of just unknowns and lessons to be learned that are going to come on the fly. You got to have a plan. You can't just be making up as you go, but you also want to be flexible enough with a plan in place to say, when we have a learning or we run into an unforeseen variable, we want to have reserve the right and have the ability as an organization, an engineering organization, a product development organization, to change some things, to iterate. And so Agile is essentially saying we want to institutionalize in our development, our product development and go-to-market process, the ability to iterate quickly. And so that can manifest a lot of different ways. There's a whole bunch of different frameworks and mentalities and ways of managing that may come out, scrum mastering, all that kind of stuff in the development world. But, as that relates to running a business, and especially within the context of what I was trying to speak about at Rise, you have kind of transactional and transformational opportunities. One of the things I talked about with transformational opportunities is that if you recognize an opportunity for a transformative event to take place in your career, in your business, in your community, whatever it is, there are several ways to go about that. You can try to do that all at once in like one large kind of transformational event. And sometimes those things are really opportunistic. The window just opens for you. You really have to understand the window's open.
There's a lot of luck. There's a lot of luck involved in that. Where it's like the timing, all the dominoes just lined up perfectly, right?
Yep. And when that happens, if you don't recognize it, window closes, it's over. But also, when the window is open, you have to do certain things to take advantage of that, because again, you don't control when the window opens. But in regard to like the transformational drip over time, where you're saying each day the effort that I put into something, is it leading toward a transformational future? That's where I think Agile as a concept is maybe a relevant way of thinking, because what you're saying is, look, if I run a hot dog stand in Manhattan every single day, I'm probably going to continue to have a hand-to-mouth existence forever, right?
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
The market forces just dictate. The market forces in that window of time just dictate that this is what you're going to get. And there's going to be some times that you're going to sell a ton of dogs, and there's going to be some times where you don't sell any dogs, right? Jeff, I want to be a hot dog salesman, dude. I forgot to. I was going to bring this up. I cut you off though, because you're going to say it, huh?
Well, I just find it interesting that Brad brought up being a hot dog salesman in Manhattan. That's what I wanted to do. I love hot dogs, man. When I was a kid, I'm not lying. When I was a kid, I wanted to sell hot dogs.
I love it, dude.
I wanted to run my own hot dog stand. Here we are talking about hot dog stands.
And then I brought it up on the podcast the other day. I was like, were you listening to Brad? Because we weren't sitting next to each other. And he's like, yeah, I heard that. I was like, that's so funny that you want to be hot dogs. And that was the analogy he used, which is so good. Yeah. I cut you off. Well, keep going, because this is brilliant.
So I was in Manhattan in the spring, and like I have a ton of respect for the street vendors, because those guys truly do hustle, and they do it every day.
Yeah,
and that's a way to make a living for sure.
And they probably have a pretty good living. It's not probably like a miserable existence, right? Or they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't keep doing it, right?
But it's a useful analogy, because like if you think about the most basic way that you do that, you have a certain amount of time and a certain amount of like just raw material, right? That you're able to serve into the marketplace every day, and you don't have a ton of control over who's coming to your stand, right? It's like literally about who's passing by. You might be able to like work a different block from time to time, but you have some limitations. So, unless you affect one of the variables in that transactional way of life as a hot dog purveyor, you're going to continue to expect kind of more or less the same results for a long time. And so, I think that's part of like the framework that I was trying to get at with this transformational concept, where if you said, look, if I'm going to put a certain amount of effort in every single day into selling hot dogs, is there anything that I can do, at least on the margins, that would potentially build something that could lead to a transformative way of life for me, or a transformative outcome for my hot dog business, or whatever the case might be, right? And I think in some regard, this is where like agile development, or agile as a concept, a way of thinking, can like link into this. Because if you said, look, the outcome that we want with launching this product, or building this business, or building this P&L inside of our business,
there was an example you used about like a production, like they were going to roll out some production of something, and you did all the marketing, and then they forgot about it or something like that. Is
The Walking Dead?
Can you use that as this example in kind of where you're headed right now? Can you use that one?
Yeah. So that example was I was working for a marketing services agency, and we had a bunch of clients in the technology sector. One of them was an education technology company in Utah called Instructure. That company now provides the learning management software to most K-12 districts and universities in the country. But they started here in Utah with some BYU grad students, right?
I think one of those guys bought a house down here.
What's that?
Everybody's got a house down here, but Brad.
I think one of those guys bought a multi-million-dollar massive second home down here.
What was the name of what's the name of the education tech company?
Instructure.
I got to remember that.
Yeah. If anybody knows any of your kids or nephews, nieces that use Canvas,
Canvas
is their primary tool.
Got it. Okay. I use Canvas. All right.
So before Canvas, everybody used this learning management system called Blackboard, and it was the dominant.
I remember Blackboard. Yeah. See, I had Blackboard when I was a kid.
Same. That's what I used when I was coming up too. And it was, this clunky, like on-premise, like take the software out of a box. Mm-hmm. But they were just the beast, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And then kind of a classic disruption scenario, and structures coming in and saying, we're going to like leverage usability and like just the kind of customer service angle around how we build the software and how we go to market with it to just displace Blackboard. But there's a lot of challenges to getting there. And one of those was, at the time in 2013, the dominant storyline in education was these massive open online courses. So like institutions like Harvard and MIT and Stanford were opening up these college courses for free for anybody in the world to take them. And they were getting, tens of thousands, in some cases more, students from around the world to take these classes. And they thought the New York Times was writing about this every day, saying this is the future of education. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that things have not quite turned out that way. But you had to have a seat to that table to have that conversation to be taken seriously. Instructure had a learning management system that had a massive open online course portal called Canvas Network, but they didn't have a lot of exposure for it. No one knew about it. And so everybody was talking about this phenomenon, and they were being left out. So we said, how do we sort of crash the party, come in on the chandelier, make some real noise around this so that we can become part of this conversation and generate some mind share around this part of the education, debate. And we thought, well, what if you modernize the literature review with some current pop culture? And at the time, the most popular show in the world was The Walking Dead. It was entering season 4. And we thought, well, what if we created a course with some university professors about things that you can learn academically around the whole idea of a zombie apocalypse.
This is such a cool idea to me too. This was the thing. I was I would totally sign up for a class like that. That is awesome, right? To actually learn that thing. That was so perfectly, because if I would have heard about it, because I missed it. I missed your marketing memo on it, but I probably would have done it at that time, probably. So keep going. I'm sorry.
Anyway, the long and short of what we planned was with our friends at Instructure, they got UC Irvine, 4 professors there to create a multidisciplinary course where they said, let's look at, the mathematics of pandemic modeling. Let's look at the physics of things like, does a crossbow bolt actually go through a zombie's head, or would it get stuck?
That's crazy.
How true to life are those things? Anyway, multiple disciplinary courses within this kind of massive open online course construct. And then we pitched it to AMC. I spent a lot of time working around trying to find the right people there, because we didn't want to go the licensing route. They were all trying to push us down the licensing route. We're like, we don't want to do that. We want no money to change hands. We want this to be an organic experience. And
an educational, a clearly educational goal, connected. Yep. It's I'm not trying to, their brand's big enough, and we're not trying to sell anything ourselves. We're legitimately just trying to educate, which is kind of funny to me that that's a weird barrier we have to always battle. You know what I mean?
Well, this is where the alignment of interest that I think we were talking about at the top comes into play. We made some educated guesses about what might motivate them, and we ended up, being right enough about that. You're not always right, but we said, look, they have the most popular show in basic cable history, but they're also trying to keep it fresh and interesting and find new levels of engagement. This is when they were starting to launch the multi-screen experience. So you could have chat rooms going on your phone or your iPad at the same time you're watching the show. So we can see they're trying to do some different things. And no one at the time had said, let's actually integrate a legitimate academic experience into pop culture. So we pitched it that way. And we said, look, we'll do all the PR and marketing. We'll take all that, burden
which is
on
really
ourselves.
The biggest cost really on their end, right? That would be the only thing they would need to do would be that. And if you're taking that off their plate, why wouldn't they do it?
Yeah. So we got the university all lined up. We've got the marketing ready to roll. We had a plan for them. They said, cool, we don't have to worry about it. They were doing activations with Mad Men and a whole bunch of other shows at the same time. So that was kind of how we got to that point. And when we launched it, it was like, it truly did like catch, kind of lightning in a bottle from a media perspective. There were over 1,000 unique press stories on that. Jay Leno was still doing his thing at the time. He mentioned it on his monologue, which was kind of cool. And then there was a ton of additional chatter. It just kind of kept spreading. This was when social media was still, I think early enough in kind of the viral.
It wasn't quite pop culture yet. Like I think social media hadn't reached like the zeitgeist at the pop culture level like it is today. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was a different time. And so, it was truly like a viral campaign. And so we ended up having, pretty strong results from that. There were 65,000 people who signed up for the course, and it really did put things on the map for Instructure. So anyway, crazy. It did. There were lots of things going on in Instructure that were transformative like that. But that was one of the things that really did help them it gave them a nice propulsion of momentum and credibility in the marketplace. Good things happened to our contact at AMC. She got a promotion. Good things happened to my agency. We had a lot of credibility that we were able to leverage and move into Silicon Valley and generate a lot of traction there. So, everybody kind of benefited from that.
So the funny thing is they AMC forgot about it, right? Is what you said?
Yeah.
I have to dive deeper into that. I got to understand that more. I know it's kind of off track of where we kind of started, but where did it go wrong? And what is it? What does that mean? Because in the presentation, you kind of just said it offhand and then you didn't go back to it. But what does it mean that they forgot about it? Like what?
Well, so the dynamics of working with a company like AMC is that you might be working with a vice president who's never met the president or the CEO of the company, right?
Uh-huh.
They've got all kinds of these siloed divisions. And so the contact that I had worked with initially was a vice president over promotions and activation. And, she clearly had some clout inside the company, some decision-making authority. She was great to work with. But it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to do kind of promotions and activation within the realm of what we typically do. And another thing to say, hey, we're going to do something experimental. That comes with some risk and also some upside. And so it was actually to their advantage to say, let's do this experiment, but let's limit kind of our engagement in it. So part of it was they're just too busy. They're running activations for multiple important shows. I mean, at that time, AMC was really dominant. They had The Walking Dead in its full glory. Mad Men was still going. Breaking Bad was still going. That was kind of like the heyday for AMC. And so they had to run all these activations and they couldn't focus on this. But also it was really not a great thing for them to say, hey, yeah, let's do something experimental and put all of our, internal credibility into that basket. That's why, again, like we were going to be with their, guidance and blessing and some constraints and parameters running all the marketing for it. So I don't think they totally forgot about it. It was just that they had multiple things going on and it was not their priority. It became something that got their attention internally. I think it was a testament to the strength of the execution of the campaign. And that, again, some things that were lucky also lined up for us.
So it was more like, so what I hear you saying is it was more, not necessarily that they forgot about it, but they were like, wait, what did we do? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. Like there was just such a small group that knew about it. And then the rest of the company was like, whoa, look at this. Holy cow. We didn't even realize this was going to be like this. Right. Which is kind of a cool twist to it. It does make a good joke, dude. I was laughing that whole time. I was like, they forgot about it. How would they forget about it? It's kind of funny.
Yeah. I mean, when you have the benefit of, 10 years of hindsight on these kinds of things, you sort of can create a little shorthand for some of this stuff. And that's one of the things that helps the story, digest well for an audience that's new to the story. But, the president of the company was, I think at the time, I don't know if he's still there, Charlie Collier was his name. And he wrote a blog post about this called Zombie School. And, he did that on his own volition because he consumed the marketing from his own company and learned about this for the first time by being exposed to it in the wild, which was a great testament to the success of the campaign for our contact at AMC.
Yeah, maybe
for an audience with him, right?
As the marketing team goes, it's like, make sure the CEO gets this marketing. Step one, make sure the CEO sees everything we do. Make sure you don't miss that guy. But that's good.
Well, and the best case scenario is that, that person, the CEO, the president, whoever that person is, actually consumes it in the wild. They don't have to have it served up to them internally. So
yeah, exactly.
That happened to me in another company where we published a story about analyzing small business data for Hurricane Harvey when that hurricane hit Houston. And our CEO didn't know that we were doing that until his in-laws, who happened to live in Houston, sent him an NPR story. Right?
Oh, crazy.
So yeah, that's always the best case scenario when they
you're doing a good job as a CEO when that stuff happens, though, right? Because you could see the team's all behind you in a specific way, and you can trust that they're going to execute at a high level. So those are always good things to see in that executive level. So I want to take a step back, though. Do you want to add anything to that? Are you curious more about?
No, I just looked up Charlie Collier, and he's the president of Roku.
Roku now.
Okay.
So even bigger.
Interesting.
That's another big dog, though. Roku's big.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the transactional. I was trying to go back to where we were. Do you remember where we were before I was like, let's tell this story right here.
Because we talked about hot dogs. We talked about
agile development. So now one of the things that I stopped you after Rise to chat about this topic. We talked about a lot all at once, but I'm thinking about these transformative moments. What do you think within like the local? If I was to take this all the way down to St. George, I'm like, okay, this market, it's a really small market. But do you see some windows of opportunity for transformative change within our community, whether it's media, whether it's housing, whether it's like electricity? Do you see that there's some windows here that from the outside looking in, you've just noticed? Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, in fact, that was the whole basis for what I was thinking about when I was invited to present at Rise. So I've spent 3 years on the chamber board of directors in St. George, even though I live in Lehigh, but I'm really from St. George. I went to Pineview Middle School and high school, did my first 2 years of college there before transferring to Utah State. And like for me, I didn't know that I was ever going to make my way back to St. George, even though I love Southern Utah. And it feels like home to me because the economy there didn't have the kinds of professional opportunities that I was looking into pursuing when I was at the age of trying to pursue that, right? Going to college and looking at what I was going to do next. Mm-hmm. Because it's really dominated historically by, you have hospitality, you have building and real estate, and then you've got, the medical establishment down there. You've got
or like government jobs.
Healthcare services.
Yeah, like government jobs.
Yeah, and some government jobs, right? And so, if you want to work in like a marketing and growth, like a strategic narrative development kind of capacity for companies that are in like a growth stage, there just weren't those opportunities. So I think for Southern Utah, I'm really passionate about this, and it's something that's been motivating me for a while. I feel like having lived in Lehigh for 15 years, I recognize some things that have happened here that seem like, there are some themes I see playing out in Southern Utah. One of those is growth is something that you can only partially plan for and influence. Places that have something to offer will grow unless you do truly, kind of aggressive things like putting moratoriums on growth and building permits and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And if you're not going to do that, you can't control if growth happens. You can only control and influence kind of how it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I live in a place in Lehigh which has so much to offer, but growth has happened to Lehigh. And I see that happening in Southern Utah. Growth is a good thing if you can harness it and you can plan for it, and you can try to account for the ways that growth can benefit everybody. And if you have economic growth, for example, you have to make sure that you're accounting for the ecosystem that helps that economic growth to be sustainable, the policies that help it to be beneficial to everybody that's involved. And that does take coordination and planning. But the main opportunities that I see for transformation in Southern Utah, one is broadening the economic base with new industries that mm-hmm. are going to complement and augment the core historical legacy industries down there. You need more building jobs and real estate jobs. You need more jobs in healthcare. You need more jobs in hospitality, but you also need different kinds of jobs in the kinds of companies that attract outside capital and outside revenue. So you're not just sharing the same pie internally, you're bringing dollars from outside into Southern Utah. Mm-hmm. And that's what the technology sector can do. That's what aerospace can do. That's what AI companies can do. And I know that technology as a sector gets a black eye because there are some bad actors, as there are in every sector. But the positives, and when you're evaluating the trade-offs of that sector, technology companies have most of their customers from outside the community, which is a good thing because those dollars are not just carved up in a pie mm-hmm. inside the community. They attract investment. They allow investors to bring dollars to St. George to fund new jobs that pay a lot of money. And then when those companies exit, the money made in those exits is recycled into the community in really important ways, and you build an ecosystem. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that you alluded to, I think a bit, Robert, is there's some resource and infrastructure challenges that are coming for St. George that are really already in play that have to be accounted for to make it sustainable. I think, it's really easy to think water never runs out, or, electricity is always going to be sustainably and like reliably provided. I think we've seen in other places that that's not necessarily true, especially when you start to have extreme weather events that wreak some havoc or whatever the case is. You
just
push
like
boundaries.
Yeah, like just the energy grid, but even water. The climate is it change. There's some elements that we can't live without. Food, water, shelter. Energy is one of those things. We, Southern Utah would not be here without air conditioning, right? We wouldn't be the size we were without air conditioning. It's just there's no question about it. And so, I think this is a big point. So do you think that obviously water is always like the primary thing? What would you say is like a secondary? Because I think housing is a big, shelter is a big concern for a lot of the community. We are a food desert. So like thinking about, agriculture and being able to actually provide some stronger stability within the food, section of it, that seems like such a hard battle to tackle because inflation's already going up, and those things cost a lot of money when it comes to food. What do you think, transformational window being open, what else? So business growth, opportunities for allowing businesses to go. But what would you say is the secondary one?
Yeah, I think water's the clear number one resource challenge. And, I think I'll leave to the experts, like exactly how you handle that. But it is absolutely true that like some assumptions were made with the Colorado River 150 years ago that are challenging, the growth that we've seen across all the states that use the Colorado River for its water needs, right? And so that's, I think, a challenge that has to be addressed with like very clear eyes. And
I think we got a lot of great people on that problem, by the way. I think we got a lot of great people. I think we have a lot of great people on that specific issue. I think I feel pretty confident. I've talked to a lot of people about it. Yeah. And I feel pretty confident that if there's anybody in the world that could help us with this, we got the right people in the place. Yeah, at least that's my feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have some good models for that. I mean, Las Vegas, say what you want about Las Vegas, but on the topic of water, they've actually done a really good job on a kind of per capita basis of figuring out how to be pretty sustainable with what they have. Now they still have challenges because that city's growing as well. But
gambling provides a lot of income into that community, though, that helps them do that because what they've done does cost a lot of money, and our economy isn't that economy, truthfully, right? So there's definitely some apples to oranges. They're both fruit, but they're a little bit different. No
question.
But I do think that we can use that model to say, okay, what's the next best step with where we're at within our economic mix, and what can we afford and what can't we? So I think that's a good one.
And I think you're thinking about this the way that I do, which is when you have an economic base that gives you more flexibility and more resources to play with, you have more options. Right. And if your options aren't limited by resources in the same way that they would if you have an economy that's a little more limited, then it does open up new opportunities for you, right? So water's, I think, a huge thing. And then housing is clearly a challenge. And that's a challenge, not just in St. George. It's a national challenge. It's a challenge across Utah, but maybe no place in Utah is dealing with that in a way that's more profound than Southern Utah. Mm-hmm. Just because I think part of it is you've seen such an influx of people identifying St. George as a place that they didn't know about before and saying, I want to move here and spend my time here, especially, when everybody went remote. But also you do have, this goes back to the economic challenges of like, you've got an inverted economy in some ways where extremely sharp increases in housing costs, but maybe not the industries that help support the wages for everybody to afford that. And so you have people who are trapped in their homes or maybe looking to upgrade, but they're really stuck because they face higher interest rates for mortgages now and much higher prices for homes. And there isn't a career ladder for them to work into higher paying jobs to afford that. And so what that leads to is more people who bring money from outside into Southern Utah to continue to exacerbate that problem. So I think there are some structural ways to deal with the housing problem with there's going to have to be a mix of, not everyone's going to get a half acre. Some people will still, but I think, every community realizes at some point that you have to have different mixes of density and different models as well. And I think that's just a reality that makes it more sustainable. But the other thing is, you really can't fully unlock housing until you figure out the economic mix as well, and specifically paths for better jobs for people.
Yeah. And being able to facilitate an economy or some kind of, it's like, what can we provide those tech? Like, how do we grow that tech industry in different ways than what we've already been doing? Because I feel like we're all headed in the same direction. At least a lot of the decision makers, the college is on board. We have Dixie Tech. We have big companies like you guys. Even though you're not necessarily, I would probably call you guys a technology company. Do you guys consider yourself a technology company? It's just not software, right? Yep. And so like there's
software and hardware.
Yeah,
doing both hard things.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And so when you think about that type of business, is that something that's just going to take time to do? There's not really a whole lot of jet fuel that you can put onto it? Because what my thought is, when it comes to this housing thing, it's the top issue. And I'm worried that as decision makers, like legislators, they're going to make too reactionary of a change. They're going to try to force something that sometimes it's just time needs to help heal it, right? Does that make sense? So I wonder, is there really anything more that we could do from your perspective to increase that growth in the private sector for technology type companies?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not I'm not an urban development expert, but I can just tell you what I've observed. So I spent a lot of time in San Francisco, company I worked for from 2012 to from about 2012 to about 2020. I was working with technology companies that were in St. George or in Utah and also in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area and seeing, they have a tremendous economy there. The economy of the Bay Area is bigger than most countries' GDPs. Yeah. It really is significant. And I think we forget about, there's kind of an oversimplified narrative of California and of San Francisco as just being this like total failed state. And
when I was in college, sorry to stop you one more time, but this is such a powerful point. When I was in college, so it was probably 10, 15 years ago, California had the 8th largest economy in the world. Yep. In the whole world, just California had the 8th largest. And when I heard that stat, it was just, I'd backpacked Europe, I'd seen the world. It's a huge place. And the fact that that's the 8th largest and it's just one state in our country is wild to me. People don't realize how powerful it is.
California has lots of problems, but it has also lots and lots of advantages that it has exploited very, very well. And one of those is that it has built a totally dominant technology ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So if you want to have a technology sector that really does well and sustains itself, you have to have become a place where great talent clusters. So people who found companies go to that place to found the company. People who can help build the companies that have experience building and growing companies in different functional areas are willing to go to that place and work for companies in that place. And you have to have people who will put money into those companies. And they have built over the course of decades all of those things on a world-class level in the Bay Area. However, their policies around things like housing and transportation have been really, really poor. Their policies around how they manage crime in the city have been really, really poor. And they're paying the price for those things. And in Lehigh, I've seen some of the same things. So housing is a major challenge in Lehigh, where I live. It's a major challenge in San Francisco Bay Area. And now it's a major challenge in Southern Utah. So it's a common challenge. The difference is that, to your point, right now, it is so much more acute, I think, in St. George because they don't have, if you're not working in one of a handful of areas where you haven't figured out how to become an entrepreneur and make money on your own terms, which is not most people, and you're really looking for a W-2 career, your options are fairly limited. And you're going to have a challenge when, you can't refinance, for example. If maybe interest rates stay high for a long time. And if people are banking on refinancing to get into another kind of home, a better home, a bigger home, whatever, that's just maybe not in the cards right now. So I think, there are certainly housing policy questions that are for people who specialize in that world. Those are the policymakers, the city council, the state legislature, those kinds of folks. And I think that there's a parallel path to that, which is how do you make sure that in parallel you're creating an environment that is like very conducive to growing and building companies that can scale and bring the kind of like job opportunities and the scalable impact, the economic impact that recycles real money into the economy and does it again and again somehow through the Southern Utah economy. And that does take some time, but it also doesn't happen inevitably. Like you have to have catalysts to get there. It's not a matter of like the economic development agencies are going to make this happen by themselves. It's not a matter of, Isaac Barlow up at TechRidge is going to make it happen by himself. All those folks are doing good work, but there really has to be a concerted vision and like a bunch of people in the community who see this as a beneficial thing for them, and they're willing to lean into it and embrace the things that are necessary. So getting more people to take the track of founding companies in St. George and bringing more companies that want to put seed funding and growth funding into those companies, more people who have been through the whole growth stage of these kinds of companies and seeing how you get from seed stage to Series A to Series B and D and on through an exit, and then doing it again and building those companies and then staying in St. George to do it again. And so I think those are the things that take time, and those are the things where if it takes more time than it has to take, you delay all those benefits and you exacerbate all the problems that come with things like housing.
Yeah, and I think we're in this moment too. Do you want to say something?
Well, I don't know this guy personally, but it just kind of reminds me of I think his name is Josh James, right? Like he started Omniture, or I can't remember all the companies. One of them now is Domo. It's like he's taken 3, 4, 5, whatever companies, built them, taken them public, made a massive exit, done it again. It's like, who's going to be that dude or dudes in St. George that stay in St. George and keep, those tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in the area and just keep doing it again. And
I can't help but think like, okay, so venture capital, like, okay, if we had a venture capital company that was based here in St. George, and you want to deploy money and wanted to specifically impact this community, you're like the venture capital company of Southern Utah, and you're going to go out and seek small businesses, tech companies that can be mobile. And you're like, you reach out to those companies and you say, hey, we want to help you build that business, but I want you to do it in St. George. You got to move to St. George. As a caveat, I think that could be a good way of bringing some of these, these one-off guys, because a lot of times it's just 1 to 10 people. Like some of these tech companies that have massive financial impacts on communities it's not like they have dozens and dozens of employees. They're small companies, but when they get that influx of money into their world, their sphere, and they want to continue to grow it, it goes back into our community and our economy, right? Yeah. And then it goes back to housing. It's like, well, we could try to attract these companies, but then they don't have anywhere to live while they're trying to build it, right? And so we're in this window of time as the looming recession that they've been talking about for 3 years is like, it's like a train that's never going to arrive at the station. But we keep waiting for it. I can't help but think when we see pullback, we see inventory and housing rise, we see demand staying fairly stable, but definitely not climbing. We're in this window, like the window of opportunity for us to like implement something of a strategic play. I think we're in that window. I do with the housing, but then it's like, how does everybody come together and execute? Because I had the Housing Action Coalition. It's a coalition of business owners, community members that are like, hey, let's try to come up with some solutions. There's a lot of solutions in play right now. There's a lot of parts moving that is making progress, but I can't always help but thinking, well, what else? What else are we missing? Yep. What else can do? Because we have such a small window of time. This agile development thought process to me is like, we kind of need to take that thought process into this moment of time right now, knowing that might not last forever, whether it's zoning or whether it's letting certain regulations be pulled down for a shortened period of time to infuse the supply into the market, which will really help stabilize and slow down the housing costs and the appreciated values of homes. Homes are still going up. we're still appreciating. So we pulled back about 15 to 18% countywide from 2022 until last year. And about halfway through last year, we started climbing again, and we climbed all this year with all the uncertainty and all the, fear in the market, high interest rates. Why we had 7% interest rates at the beginning of this year, almost 8%. And we're still chugging along with growing home values. Mm-hmm. But as soon as something changes, and the window, we don't know when the window is going to close, it seems like I want it to be a little bit more frenetic. It doesn't feel like we're making enough momentum at the moment. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it might be just the state of the economy that we're in. I mean, I know that's kind of an easy answer, but like when we're talking about these massive or big scale opportunities, even in a smaller market like St. George, sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees,
Yeah. And again, it goes back to time, right? It's like the window time. Hopefully all the dominoes line up at the same time, but you can't force it, right?
Yeah, like I want to see all of the buildings up on Tech Ridge.
Up now.
Right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I'm sure you want to see,
why are they not
you guys
yet?
Want to see the Intergalactic building go up right now, but it just takes time. Do you have any insight onto that? Where are you guys at with the process on that? Do you have any idea?
Yeah. So with Intergalactic, we're an aerospace company, and the aerospace sector is interesting because it's a little different than what I've experienced in the tech sector. In the tech sector, if you're working for an enterprise technology company like Domo, for example, Josh James founded that company after he founded Omniture, which was sold to Adobe. I can look at my window right now and I can see this big sprawling Adobe campus with thousands of employees. And that happened because Josh James, who was a student at Brigham Young University, started a technology company that turned into that entire business unit for Adobe, right?
Crazy.
And so, whatever you think about the tech sector and the founders in the tech sector and, the kind of trade-offs that come with that sector, just like any sector, it has been a massive benefit to the state of Utah, especially in northern Utah so far. And what I would say is, that kind of benefit coming to southern Utah is going to probably follow a similar trajectory around, what comes first. For us as an aerospace company, we are totally beholden to moving through the program milestones. It's not like there's an 18-month sales cycle, and then once you sign a contract, you're off and running with a customer. Yeah. We have to prove through like initial development that the proof of concept works. Then we have to do low rate production and get a separate contract for that. And then if that all goes well, then we get into full rate production contracts. And those can take 5 to 10 years to mature, right? Yeah. Because of the timelines in aerospace. And so our timing to get up on Tech Ridge is based on programs that, we have very little control over how quickly they move. We can do our part to make sure that we hit all of our milestones. But then we've, for example, spent years building a thermal management system for a next generation Army scout helicopter. And we did what was called environmental testing and qualification of that unit to make sure that when you shook the crap out of it, that it could survive that when you strike it with lightning and all these other things, these very aggressive tests, that it passes those tests before you fly it. Mm-hmm. And then our customer installed that on the aircraft. They were ready to fly it and do what's called flight qualification before they sent it into the field. And then the Army canceled the program after 3 years or multiple years and $3 billion of development investment, because what they were learning in Ukraine is these small autonomous drone swarms were taking down manned helicopters.
Yeah.
Like, we can't put any money into this.
It's the new age artillery, people. Like if you haven't been paying attention to this is new age artillery. This is unlike any warfare we've even remotely ever had. It's crazy. If you haven't paid attention, there's some videos out there that are terrifying, man. Like, you can hear them buzzing in the air, and the soldiers are like, mm-hmm. "Where's it? Where is it?"
You can't see them.
You can hear it, but you can't see it. Oh my gosh, it's crazy.
I was in a meeting in DC with some folks who are very clued in on some of these intelligence, some of the things that are happening in the intelligence community, and they said, "Look, one of the real challenges now is that we live in a world where you could conceivably, with AI, take facial recognition technology, and you could have, priority targets with drone swarms, and you take out a congressman just by identifying them walking the streets, in Georgetown, for example."
Dude, isn't that Eggman from Sonic? Eggman from Sonic. Isn't it like he like has all these drone swarms, right? And oh my gosh, I can't believe that's real. It's so crazy that's real.
So, I mean, in our world, we we have real externalities that we have to work through in addition to building a company, right? And that's true for other emerging industries too. Like software is, you can't build software companies the way you built them 10 years ago because AI has changed everything. And so I guess what I would say is when it comes to TechRidge, like if you need founders who are like recognizing market opportunities and building companies from the ground up. That's one layer of the ecosystem that has to happen. And that's one of the things that happened in Northern Utah with guys like Josh James, with Ryan Smith, with Qualtrics, who now owns Utah Jazz after taking Qualtrics public, selling it to SAP. And then you've got a whole bunch of other guys, Aaron Sconnard and Josh Coates, and just a ton of people who built companies up here that started in Utah. At the same time, you had companies that were larger companies, more mature companies that were saying, we want to just build out a sales and customer support team. Where can we do that? And then that's where the economic development folks can come in and say, we want to incentivize you to take advantage of Utah's sales and customer support talent base and build some kind of a connection and a division of the company that comes out to Utah. That can certainly happen in Southern Utah too. And if you can start getting multiple lines of effort like that line up, that's how you accelerate things that's going to take time anyway, but you shorten the timeline to say, how do we get to impact faster? So if you could, for example, just build a sales career inside of the technology sector in Southern Utah right now with one of 36 companies instead of one of 4 companies, that would be a game changer. And then later on, maybe they said, the same companies say, look, we think we can actually build out the marketing department here or the HR department here. We think there's enough talent to do that. And then maybe you have a mix of opportunities that starts to grow. So I think all those things have to start to come together and be much more, they all have to be accelerated for this to move more quickly.
Yeah. Man, I could ask 50 questions more.
Yeah, we could keep going.
Well, so my thought is the housing thing. I think there's the single. I kept thinking about like little strings, right? Is a rope is stronger if you have individual strings. You could build buildings taller if you're lining up sticks, right? That's how they built the Burj Khalifa. It's like individual, like it keeps getting taller as you get closer together. You have these individual anchors, and this, what you're talking about, is we just need some more strings. Like if we just keep adding little straws into the economy, we're gonna catch lightning in a bottle in some of these opportunities. It's gonna help keep us going. And so keeping it top of mind, I think for me in this podcast and this platform is kind of what my thought is, like keep this kind of a dynamic going. Is it agile? We have to be more agile with development of the city in this age, because I think sometimes we're too short-sighted and we also get in fear of too far away. Like we're so scared of what's really far down the road. And then we're also so close, especially with somebody, it's like a development next to your house. It's too close to home, right? It's too short term of a dramatic, upheaval of our life. And it's hard to find that middle ground. It's like, hey, we have to build for the future generations. Like that's, I mean, at least from my, religious belief, God wants us to serve and grow the community and like take care of the people that are here and going to follow after you, right? And so if we're only thinking about ourselves and not saying, okay, in this moment, are we going to be agile and watching the city develop and grow and not be so stuck in just having to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it? I think we're in another moment in time. We got to take that to a different approach. But yeah, Go ahead.
Not to go deep on this, but so in my religious culture, there's this concept of like turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers, and it's usually talked about through the context of like LDS temple worship, and I think that's one way to think about it. But another way to think about this is when you have the hearts of the children being turned to the fathers. This is understanding that there are some principles that are pretty timeless, and if you build a community or a business or an industry on certain principles, that's kind of like what you're doing in agile development. You're saying, look, there are some core values here, some principles that have to be true. But then when you think about, the hearts of the fathers being turned to the children, you're saying, look, we're going to have to adjust and adapt to make this world a better place for those people who come after us. We can't just try to optimize for what's best for us right now. We have to understand that, the things we do right now will have an impact on the next generation, the generation after that. And that really is the agile part of that, saying, look, what lessons can we learn and apply so that we're not so rigid and draconian in our thinking that we believe we have every single answer. It's instead of being a playbook that because this worked 50 years ago, it has to work now. You recognize and differentiate between the principles that worked and the practices that may be out of date. And maybe you need to apply some new practices to those same principles and say, what does it look like now? And I think that's where you really can start to get some progress.
I think a good example of that is when you go to probably pick any single one in any city, but you go to a city council meeting and it's just a whole bunch of people that think they know everything about everything. And this is the way we've already done it. And this is how it is.
Yeah. And they tend to be the loudest because they feel like we're going to make mistakes. There's fear in the future. We've seen too many mistakes be done already. And because that happened to us in the past, we don't ever want to get even close to that again, right? And there's a lot of that fear that comes into play with it. And that's where political will, it takes political will, business will, it takes the will of that core, those principles, and reaffirming those principles too within the community, right? Is like being consistent and reaffirming and saying, these are the principles that we're unwavering on. And also this is how we're going to keep moving forward. And if you don't like it, you can vote me out, right? And not be worried about that thing. To me, it's just kind of crazy that we got to this point where it's like we're making fears, huge decisions out of fear, even at the government level. Is like we need the fearless people in there to say, I think this is the right direction, and I don't care if it's popular or not. Yeah, or that's why I got elected, because you were supposed to trust that I had the right vision and the right feeling at heart when I made this decision.
And like even incorporating like energy, for example, like what's energy going to look like in Southern Utah in 10 years or 15 years? People that are in the government now, the local government, that care enough about that to make decisions that will impact what their kids and grandkids and so on and so forth will be doing in Southern Utah, right? I mean, there's a chance that energy could be triple the cost in 10 years down here in Southern Utah. And it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do as a community to...
Rocky Mountain Power that's their plan, to triple the costs for Rocky Mountain Power. So if you're on Rocky Mountain Power in Southern Utah, they've already proposed tripling the costs.
Right.
And that's right now.
And if you're on Dixie Power, where you've got the cheapest electricity essentially in the country, do you want your power bill to quadruple or 5x or 6x?
Yeah, because they get their power from a coal plant up north, and that's and that's the thing, is that's the diversification. So we could talk about power, because we talked about power a little bit, and I've tried to get more educated as since we've spoke last about that. But I think there's a transformational opportunity that might be coming about to invest in that infrastructure. But I think this is one of those things where we have to look way further down the road. Like this is one where we're like, okay, yeah, there's problems in the next 3 to 5 years, but there's nothing we could do about that stuff. Like a lot of that stuff is out of our control. But what's the best decision so that when I retire, right, I'm 37, going on 38, when I retire, and I expect to retire here because that's the plan, right? I want to make sure my power bill isn't insane. How do I do? I got 40 years. So like, what's the plan in 40 years for our power grid, and how do we collectively decide, like, I want this for me, and it's a really long time, and it's also going to help the generations behind me. I don't know if that kind of a conversation is even one being had in the county, but I think it's definitely an important one.
Yeah. And I think, just going back to something you guys mentioned earlier, I think part of the psychology around this entire conversation is that it tends to devolve into like two binary camps. And one camp is saying they're romanticizing the past into something that it really wasn't, and saying, 50 years ago or whatever, life was so much better, and we should have life be like that again or forever. And, it ignores progress that's been made in the meantime that's benefited everybody's life, that's positive, and also new challenges that we're dealing with that need to be dealt with that are not solved necessarily by applying the same thinking and practices from that time. Maybe there's some principles, again, that make sense, but the practices and the particulars have to adjust to the times. And then there's the other camp that says, the shiny city on the hill, everything we have now is terrible. Everything we had in the past was terrible. But if we do different things only, then the future will be great. And I think both of those are wrong. I think that there are, things that you carry forward that are substantive, that mean something, that can carry forward in spite of the inevitability of change, and that you can have those things translate and inform the practices, the policies that you bring in, and that includes things like how do you set the expectation for a community around what it wants and what meets the expectation of like this is good governance for our community, this is good progress for our community. I think that conversation is not very productive right now in Southern Utah. It's not very productive, nationally because of just the way politics are. I think it's hard.
I do think it's a systematic. I think it's a systematic issue too. We're dealing with a system that has broken parts and also limitations that just are baked into the thing that we can't control too, right? And so it's not just unique to us. I think it's system wide.
No, I think it's endemic right now. I think we're a little spoiled, and we've had the privilege of saying we're going to pick fake outrages to focus on and fake problems to fixate on instead of, and at the expense of dealing with real problems. And I would love to get to a place where instead of everybody trying to own everybody all the time and just retreating into these tribal, dunk sessions, it's like, let's identify a real problem that everybody benefits from solving, or a real opportunity that everybody benefits from capturing. Let's like agree on a common set of facts, and some of them might be inconvenient facts. They may be challenging facts. They may force us to like squirm a little bit, and let's start a conversation about solving that problem. If energy is a problem, and I agree with you, I think that if you look ahead to when I want to retire and when I want my kids to have a life that's at least as good as mine, there are problems that we take for granted today as being solved that will not be solved for them because of changing dynamics. And I think energy is one of those. Housing's another one. And so what are you doing now in the spirit of like looking forward to, turning your mind to generations that are coming to benefit them? Because also the work that you do to benefit that generation 10 years in the future does create immediate benefits as well. You'll see benefits next year and the year after that and 3 years down the road and so on and so forth. But you don't get those things if we're constantly spinning on kind of identity politics and people like having culture wars. I really think that is part of the mix. It's not just about getting policies right in the abstract and making sure that like entrepreneurs are starting businesses here. You also have to get to a place where there is a healthy alignment on like, hey, here's what we want for the community, and it's based on something real.
Yeah, for sure. You got a jam. I wanted to talk one more topic with you. Do you got like 30 more minutes?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Jeff's gonna say sayonara.
I got a jam. I got a football practice from 3 to 5 and then 5 to 7.
Davis High School Hall of Famer Jeff Watkins is gonna go help the kids with football, dude. Way to go, dude.
I'm still on the 200 meter dash record book.
You're on the top 10?
I'm number
top
6.
5. Ooh,
still number 6. I was number
6.
3 at one point. Can you believe that?
I can believe that. I beat you in a race though, so. No, I didn't. I keep challenging to him a race. I challenge him to a race, and then I just don't show up. It's like, I'll race you. I'm faster than you, and then I just don't show up.
Yeah.
Okay, man.
I'll do the same. I'll challenge you to a race and I'll show up too, Jeff.
Let's do it. Let's do like
when you're down here.
Let's do a 3-day
You're down here in a
race.
couple of weeks. When you're down here in a couple of weeks, we'll do like a Tech Ridge race.
We got to start training though.
That's right.
Anyway. He's got to train. He's literally going to go.
Schedule and not show up.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, we'll see you in a minute, man. So I think energy's one. I also, it's another huge topic, right, that you can kind of tackle. But I am curious your thoughts on this from your marketing perspective and your background perspective. I'm curious about your thoughts about the podcast, right? And what is 21st century news, like marketing and news? We've decentralized information, especially news information. When the newspaper died, the television is dying rapidly for their news, as far as getting their news from. I heard a huge percentage of like the Gen Alpha is getting their news from TikTok, like huge percentages. And so when I think about those, we're going to always go through these waves of, I can't imagine we're not going to continue to go through these waves of social media platforms that catch on and are popular. I'm hopeful that we've just been done. Can we just not have any more? Like, do we need to have any more of those social media platforms? But I'm curious to think, what do you think news looks like in the next 5 to 10 years? Like, are we going to continue to see the same trend? I'm trying to figure out how do we navigate this and how do we expand on getting local stuff and talking about local stuff, but being able to actually get buy-in from the community to get on the same page. Because I think that's one of the things that we're struggling with is getting on the same page. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is like, I'll be disciplined about not going too deep here because I have a ton of thoughts about this. So having spent a lot of my career,
you can talk as long as you want, man. I got nothing going on, so you can talk as long as you want.
Well, let me try to summarize my thoughts here. So my dad spent almost 40 years in journalism, in local print journalism, newspapers primarily. I started my career in journalism and got a journalism degree at Utah State before getting into marketing. And
so you're a perfect person to ask this question to. I didn't even realize it. Thanks, man.
Well, I mean, here's what I think. One of the things that has happened over the last 10, 15 years is the unbundling of cable, where everybody said, we're so sick of cable. And so we're going to I'm going to sign up for HBO Max. I'm going to sign up for Disney Plus, and you get all these individual subscriptions, Netflix. And one of the things that's happened now is we've come through a cycle where now people are saying, I have too many subscriptions to manage, and there's a lot of redundancy across them. Can I consolidate them? And we're basically reinventing the bundle. We're like reinventing cable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that these things are cyclical. And I think right now with media, one of the things that's happened is, generally speaking, if you look at any data set that touches this topic, faith and trust in institutions generally is very, very low, whatever the institution is, whether it's big business, whether it's the church, whether it's the media. Faith in institutions is very low. And so people are fairly jaded. And I think that what they've done is they've retreated to the democratization of platforms. So podcasts, anybody can create content now. And so it's sort of a popularity contest. If the idea feels like it resonates, people tend to gravitate toward the purveyor of that idea. And that's not a bad thing in a vacuum, but it does create a problem of like, there's not a shared reality because there are not incentives to gatekeep information based on a rigorous interrogation of facts. That's one of the things that, like the legacy news media or not, for at least a period of time, there's always been kind of yellow journalism, and there's been quite a bit of differentiation between institutions in the news media that actually took their journalistic responsibilities seriously and put rigor into the process versus those that were really trying to masquerade as, being objective, but just pushing an agenda. That's always been true.
Like me. No, because I'm not an expert. Like I fear, because as I watch podcasts, I'm like, there's some things that I don't know what I'm talking about. And then I'm talking about it, but I'm pretending to know that I know everything as best I can. I'm trying to be, objective and just be exploring this curiosity along the way. It's a difficult balance to do, because the journalist, to do that rigor and that work, it's expensive. It's a very passion oriented, because there's not a ton of money in it, period. There's just not a lot of money in it. So It's interesting to see this balance. And then, like you said, it's cyclical, where we're going to get all these individuals out there like myself that's just trying to do this, but I'm not a journalism major. I'm not, a news guy, but I want to give value. And I see the value in the conversation I've had, and I've got a lot of good feedback from the listeners of the show. And so it does keep me want to go do it, but I can't help but think, what direction, as we continue to grow, what direction do we go? Do we expand in other things, or do we just, what do you think?
So, I mean, on your show, I think I won't speak for what you want to do. I'll just tell you the things that I think about that matter to me, and I'm one person. I think that I tend to anchor toward, like, I really want to have a high degree of faith and confidence in the underlying facts, that we agree on the facts. And then there can and should be like a wide distribution of opinions that emerge from those facts. And that's a good, healthy debate to have. I mean, if we said, COVID's a good example. There is not a shared reality around that problem from the time that it started to now. Yeah. And there are, thousands of additional problems that are just like that right now. Yeah. And that's because people are taking information from different places where there is a continuum of commitment to fact. And, you're in one place on that continuum, and other people are on a completely different continuum. So I think it's a challenging time right now, because media consumption really follows like algorithmic patterns. Algorithms reward certain things that are not necessarily congruent with truth. And then you also have people who are getting dopamine hits that, self-reinforce consuming certain kinds of media. I do think that at some point, I don't know when this point is, there will be a turn, because people will realize they've had too much sugar. and they're going to like crave a little bit of substance and some meat again. And they're going to start saying, just like we did with bundling up our subscription services, hey, I really crave institutions in, news and information that are based on trying to get to some kind of systematic way of like getting to truth. Even if like the opinion piece of that is left to other people to decide. I want just facts and truth.
Yeah.
I think we'll get to a point where people feel starved for that, but I don't know when that happens and when the appetite for that starts to turn. But I do think it'll happen. But right now we're definitely in a kind of a trough of disillusionment when it comes to, media as an institution. So what people do with that, and at what point people start to say, hey, I don't want just people to tell me what they think I want to hear. I want to know something that's true. I think that, I don't know when that happens, but I think
we're there. I'm gonna disagree that I think we're already ready for that. I think from the millennial generation, so the total population that is the millennial generation through Gen X, the boomers, the rest of the generations that are left, that's a big enough population that they want that. I want that. I used to get the newspaper when I was a kid. When I was in high school, I picked up the newspaper every single day and I read the newspaper. And I think it's so crazy to me that there's a generation of adults that never did that. Yeah, I think it's crazy to me. And so I think we're already back to that where it's like, man, I don't know what a trusted source is. I could use one of those right now. And so that's one of the things I've wanted to implement, and I'd be curious your thoughts, but I'm obviously going to have to do more research and in building it out. But I saw on YouTube, there was I saw, what's his name? Charlie Kirk did it, but then who owns Daily Wire? Shapiro. He did a debate where he debated like 25 like Kamala Harris voters or liberals or whatever. And what they did is they ran like a real-time fact checking. So like as they were talking, they would like real time do a fact check on it. And it's this organization that's like basically an AI type thing that does fact checking all along the way. So like any statement of fact that's made, it'll like validate or invalidate what that was said based on some criteria, or here's some nuance here. And it was interesting. It was hard to follow the debate because it was so fast paced. It was hard to follow the debate and then also try to jump into the facts. It was almost going too fast because it was a bunch of information. So I didn't really get a good opportunity to like dive in and see, is that fact checking actually all that good? Or because I think there's still, going back to the algorithm, there's still a lot of fishiness going on with what we get out of that AI thing. But as that progresses and as that gets better, and the reliance on the journalists to have to do as deep of a dive as they're thinking through the story, it could shorten up that time frame. I think the research portion of it, I think that time frame is going to shorten up, and if they can shorten that up, I think there's more profitability in it. But I think it's also a way to, in real time, communicate to the audience that we're willing to say, we're as fast as we can do a correction to ourselves. Because in the newspaper, they'd issue corrections. It'd be like on the 5th page or the 7th page of the paper, but there's no corrections anymore on media, right? There's not really, especially video. Video has 0 corrections, issued about what was said in that video. And if you try to attempt to find one, I doubt you'd even come across one. It's probably page 35 on Google or something like that. So I think there's an appetite for that. And that's one of the functions I kind of wanted to add into this, at least this podcast and stuff that's going on in town. I think that'd be kind of a cool thing to do.
Well, like you, I share your appetite for like media outlets that are trying to get it right and not just trying to push, what they think people want. Because I think, we do live in a time where people are wanting to be told what they want to hear, and inconvenient truths are difficult for people, and debate is usually about ideology and feelings as opposed to about what to make of certain facts. So like there are things that can be done there. So one of the things that we've lost with newspapers really folding up, their business models were destroyed by Google because these newspapers started putting their content online, and they weren't gatekeeping at all, and so Google just aggregated them, and then you were trading digital pennies for like the print dollars that they were getting before. Just destroyed their business models. And to your point, it's expensive to do real journalism, and even real journalism gets things wrong. But when you get things wrong, and you're willing to admit it, and you hold yourself to a published standard. One of the things that a lot of very good journalistic institutions have done for a long time is they have a published, kind of ethics guide that outlines here are the things that we care about from a core values or principles standpoint. These are the standards we hold ourselves to in our reporting. This is how we try to arrive at truth as much as possible. And when you have that published and people can look at the rubric for what you say you're trying to do, and then they can hold your journalism accountable to that, there's a layer of accountability there. It's a self-correcting mechanism.
Yeah, that's actually really smart.
So I think those are things that are missing now.
It's almost like the way they do scientific papers and scientific studies is you publish your findings, and then the rest of the institutions can go in and say, did you get that right? I'm going to fact check you on that. And there's this self-correcting system within science that does that. And just news doesn't get that, right? It's not even remotely close to getting that. And so I think that's an interesting idea, is how could we get a collaboration of individuals that do that self-checking mechanism without real singular institutional an overseer, but Google's still the overseer because they're a monopoly, right? Like there's several very big tech companies that control what we see on a regular basis. And there's definitely a gap in there in fixing that. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah.
Or if
there's
you should,
a whole bunch of theories and people who've had feelings about, what to do with that, which is, a bigger problem to solve. I think the most compelling thing I've heard is that you probably should treat social media companies as publishers, where they actually are, they're liable. Like if I were the
they got
publisher
that pass. I think Zuckerberg was saying how he's like, if I was liable to what was posted on the media, on Facebook, he said they would have never grown. It would have killed him instantly.
Yeah. I think that's probably an exaggeration, but because again, one of the things that makes those outlets grow is that they are able to generate an algorithmic response that does create engagement, and they thrive off of engagement. And engagement and truth are pretty antithetical to each other, because it's the same thing as like if you take a 5-year-old kid and say, I can give you kale or I can give you sugar. That child does not know how to differentiate between the two, and is going to pick the one that gives the greatest initial satisfaction. And you're going to eventually, without having the immediate feedback loop, poison that child. And that's happening to our brains with social media, because we're constantly getting things that create a dopamine response, and we get into these vicious cycles. And our brains are not trained evolutionarily to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And so we're in very uncharted territory with all of this. And so, I'm not saying that we need to just like choke ourselves on spinach, but there is perverse incentive baked into those systems. And part of it is engagement being the primary. If you told the New York Times engagement was the only thing that matters to you, you would get a different New York Times, especially if you had legal constructs that said like, you can publish libel and defamation and you're not legally liable for any of that. You'd see more libel and defamation in the pages of the New York Times. Yeah. And so I think, there's a lot that goes on there, and this may be like a little too far afield for what you want to do here, but I do think that that's part of the challenge we deal with in getting to shared reality. And it affects things like what we're talking about with St. George, because, again, people get very, very strong cognitive reward signals about focusing on things that they know probably in their heart of hearts don't really matter, but that's fun to fight about. Meanwhile, real problems and opportunities are kind of like taking a back seat. So,
and this is where the interesting, I think you touched on something too, that's also so difficult, because we quickly slip into, if we're talking about treating social media as a publisher and saying you have to be accountable for what is found on that platform, then it goes into a freedom of speech thing, right? It slips quickly off into this, wait, you're telling me I can't say something. And another person is telling me I can say this and not this, and I can't accidentally get something wrong without having some kind of accountability to, but then, so I'm even thinking through it even live, but I can see how it slips into this. It's a freedom of speech issue, but there is a disconnect there. But it's easy that would be the general, nope, you're trying to eliminate free speech. That's what I can't help but think that would be the pushback on creating these social medias as publishers.
I think you hear that from people who either don't have a very strong understanding of like the legal constructs that constitute free speech as we define it in this country, or in some cases, there's some bad faith there too, where people they have a financial interest and economic interest in trying to like distort the meaning of free speech. Free speech has never meant, even with the First Amendment, that you can say anything you want without consequence. So, for example, free speech does not mean that you have to be platformed. There is no guarantee for platforming. So if a social, if the, going back to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, they don't have to publish anybody's words. CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, they don't have to put anybody on their show to demonstrate that they're, fulfilling their requirements of the First Amendment. They can make editorial decisions about who gets the airtime or the print pages or the time or the space on the internet. And that's true for algorithms as well. They get to decide what goes into the algorithm and what they reward. And it's also true that there's a whole bunch of legal precedent and actual law and policy that says that you can't, for example,
financially benefit. And you can't also financially benefit from this thing that you may or may not have said on purpose, right? You can't, if you're constantly setting, I'll use Alex Jones as an obvious example, right? It's like you said all this stuff and you were financially benefiting from saying this lie, and now you're going to have to be liable for that. Yeah. And to me, I don't think that that's wrong. I think I want that function within the justice system to say somebody can't financially benefit from willfully or even unwillfully, like if they've done it on accident, spreading something that isn't factually accurate. And also that what's factually accurate is a moving target, going back to the different, periods of time. This is tough, man. Totally. We're going to tackle all the, we're going to totally figure this out. You and me, we're going to talk it all out and totally figure out how to do all this.
Yeah. I'm sure we will. But yeah, I mean, nobody, I think we've agreed as a society, for example, like you said, it's in nobody's best interest, except for, it's really in society's best interest to make sure that there are laws against defamation. So that is a constraint on, this idea of unbridled free speech. You can say whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. Really, freedom of speech is about saying the government is not going to proactively muzzle your speech. It does not mean that speech doesn't come with consequences. Some of it is social consequence. Like if you say something that upsets people, you may suffer social consequences. You can lose your job in an at-will employment environment because you say something that the company thinks was not a wise thing. It didn't, demonstrate judgment on your part. That is taken to an extreme with things like cancel culture in ways that I don't think is helpful, but it's still something that we recognize as being a facet of free speech, right? There is consequence. There are also things that we've said, this facet of free speech actually comes with legal consequences. Like if I were to say, something untrue about someone that damaged their reputation in a material way, it would be totally within their right to sue me for defamation. It was like what happened with Alex Jones, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of caveats to that I think are they get missed sometimes.
Yeah, that's a big problem to solve. I want to keep thinking, how do we keep driving important information to the community and thinking of clever and different ways to do that. I have a wild hair that I'm like, we could just bring the newspaper back. I'm sure we could figure out a way to make it financially work, but it's probably not reality. People maybe they just don't want a piece of paper. I was thinking, like, how do you double click on topics like that? Going back to like the live fact checking is like, let's say we touch on something, agile development, but having some kind of interactive ability to be like, oh, agile development, and it's like on the screen, you could tap on that and you can learn more about it, right? And then, or the fact checking might say he may be not right or wrong, or he's partially right or partially wrong. Find out more here, and now you get a collective of sources that validate or invalidate what was said. And I think that would be thinking of a tool for me, especially for AI, to actually be productive instead of robots, is do something like that. I think that could be something that would be cool. So hopefully we can see, or somebody figure that out for me. If you're listening in, will you guys figure that out for me? I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah, no, I love the creative thinking, and also the problems you're trying to solve, which are around how do you actually get better, good information more easily, which is what technology we would hope would do for us, right?
Yeah, exactly. Last thing, what's your hat? Well, it's I-47G.
Just 47G. This is part of their mark. So okay. 47G started as an aerospace association for the state of Utah, and now has grown into an industry association for the deep tech sector for Utah, with a kind of an emphasis on aerospace. But it's a public-private partnership with the governor's office as well. So they're doing a lot of good work to try to build some momentum for the deep tech sector in Utah.
Deep tech is not affiliated with deep state. hopefully. Is that right?
I wouldn't know if it is. A lot of government contracting going through that world.
Yeah, there is. But it's an important business, and the government does need to be a part of it. I had one of the mayors of the cities on, and I was asking about AI, and they're like, yeah, we'll probably be the last one to adopt anything AI within the local government. I was like, uh-oh. You might want to start thinking about it. You might want to start looking at like, what is the options? What are the safest, most useful tools out there in the industry, out in the artificial industry? The cities probably should be looking at that. There should be a task force somewhere doing something to help cities, especially smaller towns. How do we utilize this? How do we stay in the game and not let it go to like, oh, we went from filing papers. We totally missed all of MS-DOS, got that late, and then now we're resetting our systems over and over again. I think there should be concerted effort on that. It's another total sidetrack, but was there anything else you wanted to chat about?
No, hey, I appreciate it. Great to chat with you. Love the way you think. Appreciate what you're doing for the community and just a good conversation. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. What do you? You're going to be back here in a couple of weeks. You're coming back down to St. George.
Yeah, timing's still TBD. Trying to get a couple of things going with some partners that we're trying to bring into town. So, but I'll definitely let you know once I get that secured.
Yeah, man. Let's grab some lunch or go hit some balls or whatever you want to do side by side. Something when you get down here. It'd be awesome, man. Thanks for jumping on a Friday. We'll see you out there. Thanks, man.
Sounds good. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.